Aloha, and welcome back to The Whole Gamut. I'm your host, Hillary Weinberg, and I'm here today with Andy MacCracken of the National Campus Leadership Council. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
So we're here to talk about, well, first let's discuss your organization. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So we're about 4 years old now. We're still fairly new, but our big focus at NCLC is really empowering student leaders around the country to come together and grapple with really big issues facing our generation. So we primarily work with student body presidents, but we work with student leaders generally beyond that to focus on a lot of economic issues facing young people, particularly around student debt, college finances, as well as a lot of work around campus sexual assault prevention, mental health. We're gearing up for a bunch of work on the climate and a variety of issues. And the reason why we hit a variety of issues like that is because we know that student leaders are trying to navigate these very, certainly overlapping, sometimes intersecting, but very complex challenges facing our colleges and just our country in general.
So what makes your organization unique? What's the thing that you're most passionate about?
We got our start really around student loans in 2012, and I think what we brought to that table in a unique way, I guess to set the stage as a refresher for many of us who lived through it or were just sort of paying attention at the time. In 2012, student loan interest rates were set to double overnight on July 1st, and we ended up seeing a really impressive, I think, just effort from young people around the country, particularly students, to lift up their own voices and really step in to share why that would have been a negative impact for the, well, now about 40 million borrowers around the country. And so at the time we knew that was going to have an impact on about 7.5 million borrowers for the Stafford loan. And what we really brought to the table was making sure that beyond just having a large number of students involved with an effort, we wanted to really make sure that the elected leaders of those students, so primarily the student body presidents, were actually at the table and elevating their own perspectives to really shape what ultimately the solutions could be, but also make sure that long-term there's stronger engagement on these issues on a campus-by-campus level. So starting from that and really building out from there, I think we've been able to really take a lot of these challenging, often complex issues that Washington, D.C. is trying to navigate at a federal level and make that a little bit more accessible and actionable for student leaders who are figuring this stuff out as it affects their classmates on a very local level. And so throughout that process, I think it's a lot of trial and error and getting to know all the different students around the country. This past year, we worked with over 500 institutions, so you can imagine there are a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of different challenges that they're facing, but throughout a lot of this work, and I think what makes us unique is we try to operate behind the scenes. We're really just a glorified switchboard operation, just sort of connecting conversations and making sure that the students who are trying to tackle these really, really big challenges have the resources and the direction and the mentorship they need to be successful.
Well, I love that you're doing this because I really think that people in our generation need to be involved in politics and need to be involved in these issues because they're not being brought up on the national stage. They're talking about a lot of different flashy things and they're talking about the economy, but they're just things that are very important to our generation that are being skipped. And I'd like to focus a little bit on student loans, what you're saying. So what is the state of student loans right now?
It's mostly terrifying. So we have close to 1.3, more than 1.3, depending on who you're asking, $1.3 trillion of outstanding student loan debt in the country. That affects over 40 million borrowers, and obviously a lot of that is held by recent graduates and folks who are in the millennial generation, but it also, a good chunk is actually held by people of retirement age. So we know it's affecting a wide range of people with different backgrounds and economic situations. Part of the challenge with it isn't just, I think there's a big narrative around whether or not you should borrow it all for school. We know that loans have actually been a tool to finance higher education for about 60, 70 years. However, we've seen over the last a couple decades, just such an increase in borrowing. I think especially as we went through the recession, we know family incomes remained stagnant while tuition kept rising and rising. The only way to cover that gap without significant increase in programs like the federal Pell Grant, which helps many low-income students and families, as well as more state-based financial aid. Without those things matching pace, the difference was made up by student loans. And so not only do we have more students borrowing more and more money, but we have just the overall, there are more students themselves. So the average debt amount has increased year to year, doesn't really show any signs of slowing right now. And we know each year more and more students are actually borrowing. So that's why we hit $1 trillion about 3 years ago, and it's jumped up by a third really in the last couple years, because it keeps skyrocketing.
So why is higher education so expensive? I mean, how was it affordable in our parents' generation, and now it's so expensive? I mean, it's impossible for most students, I imagine, to go to school without loans, and scholarship programs are few and far between. I know, and Andy's actually also an American University alum, is that correct?
Go Eagles, yeah.
Yeah, and I know in our school, I had friends that had scholarships that funds that dried up halfway through school because of budget cuts. But why, if we go into one of the most expensive schools in the country, why is it so expensive? What is that cost?
A lot of really smart people are asking the same question, and a lot of folks are coming up short, I think, on really strong answers for it. So right now we see a really big public debate on what is the value of college and really what's the purpose. And it forces us into that conversation, I think, when we see not just how much student loan debt there is out there, but also when you're looking at default rates. We know about 1 in 7 borrowers actually defaults on their loans within the first couple years after graduation. And we also know that, unfortunately, job prospects are still really tough. And I think there are a number of studies that everyone can think of that points to not just unemployment among recent graduates, but also underemployment, which tends to be a much larger challenge as well. So when you look at then, what are we actually putting into the higher ed system, and why does it cost so much? I think when you look at, if we're going to compare from our generation to what our parents experienced, or even just some of our older siblings experienced, we're looking at a higher education system which is trying to serve more people, a much larger student population, an increasingly changing student population with very divergent needs often. And so when you look at just the overall funding that goes into higher ed, we know the vast majority of students go to public institutions. So not like we did at AU, but thinking about even University of Hawaii. We spoke to Kelly, who's a student body president there last week, and got to hear a lot about what she's working on over in Manoa. And I think some of what we've seen, especially over the last decade, is just a very drastic decrease in state funding for higher education. So if you go back 25 years, nationwide, the average between states on how much the state was going to put in to finance higher education versus what students and families were going to put into it was, in some states, it was about 50-50. In a lot of states, it was closer to 60-40, or even 66, sort of 33% range there. And we've seen a significant flip in that time, where students and families are picking up the vast majority of the bill. And so when you think about it, a lot of states were in really tough positions, and when we went into the recession, we had a lot of governors, a lot of state legislators trying to figure out what to do when state revenue wasn't coming in and what they're going to cut. And unfortunately, University of Hawaii isn't going to relocate to Nebraska. It's always going to be in Hawaii. So what does that mean for those institutions? They had to turn to other method of revenue, and the main driver is, of course, tuition. So we saw tuition go up drastically, and of course family incomes weren't able to match pace. So that's part of why I think overall, higher education isn't necessarily getting more expensive. It's just that at the vast majority of institutions, or at the vast majority of institutions where most students attend, the state funding wasn't there to continue the type of support that made it more affordable for the students on their end. Another thing that we've seen an increasing, or that has been causing an increase in the cost of college, is just a lot of these other costs. So more and more schools are becoming residential. That wasn't always the case, and even when our parents were in school. So there are a lot more costs associated with putting up residence halls, and I think fortunately and unfortunately, I think it cuts both ways. To be competitive in higher ed as an institution of higher education, a lot of it is around marketing. So you hear
this is something that's really interesting to
Sure.
me, because schools, the point of going to a school is to go for the education. However, I mean, even in my own family, my little sister just went, she was choosing between a few different schools, and she got scholarship to one, but she's like, well, yeah, but the other school is a state school, it's a bigger school, it's a state school, and has a better Greek life. It's, we're not from the state she went to, but has a better Greek life, and that's why I want to go there. And I think it's so interesting that schools aren't selling the education, they're selling the experience. And I think it leads a lot of people to choose schools for the wrong reasons. They're not necessarily just going for the education. And there's this whole industry around college counselors and tours, and of course, not even to start in college sports, which is a completely different topic. We'll save it for another time. That there's this whole industry built around it, and now students end up paying for that experience. They're paying for the 4 years of fun. And yes, of course, they get a great education. There's many top schools out there with great, Greek life and clubs and what have you. But why are we paying this much for this? Where was that turnaround?
So I think you raise a really great point, which is, what's actually driving students' decision making on which school they're going to. And I think we have to think about that as really one of the main motivators, because it is a very competitive market for institutions, and they're fighting over the same students. And especially right now, we've sort of passed the high water mark for overall student population. So even though more students are continuing to attend higher education, the overall pool of high school graduates is shrinking a bit. So schools are going to be fighting over the same students and all of that. So thinking about an institution like ours at American, a lot of what drives how they market the school, and how they're actually positioning themselves and how they're moving resources internally is based on rankings. And U.S. World News Report is sort of the name of the game. Princeton Review is also in there. And unfortunately, you have a lot of these, sort of institutional publications that are really driving the discussion around what college is worth and what school is better than another. And a lot of that, not a whole lot of that is driven by what overall outcomes would look like in higher ed, because not everyone agrees on what outcomes are supposed to look like, depending on the type of institution and depending on, obviously, just like individuals have different goals moving into higher ed if they have the goals as well. So we saw actually recently the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, released what's called their college scorecard, and it pulls data that they've been collecting for years and has been available for years, but actually turns it into a better mechanism to really help students and families compare schools on a more of an apples to apples basis. So I always like to talk about, you have CarMax.com to compare cars, and you can figure out, I want this color, or I want to spend this much money, or I want this, this sort of range of miles per gallon, this efficiency, whatever it is you want to look for, you can base on geography of where you're trying to find the car. We don't have that for higher education, which is tough because it's a much larger investment, of course, than just a car. But also it's also difficult because when you're thinking about the outcome of having a car, like it gets you there, you want it to be reliable, but there's also the resale value. You can't really resell your degree. And we know college graduates have higher earnings over lifetime, but it's hard to actually compare that school to school at this point. So, so we see
there
this
are
new
some
tool come
publications
out.
that have attempted this.
Yeah.
I have read articles on, which school is the best bang for your buck. American did very poorly, unfortunately, even though people tended to have jobs from our school pretty soon after college. But the best for your buck, what school is the best for your major. But it's interesting, and also like the kind of national discussion among, about like what it's like to be, 18, 19, 20, 21, whatever, until you graduate college, is, a lot about, well, you're supposed to discover yourself, you're supposed to have different options, you're supposed to have all this fun, which is great and a wonderful dialogue. However, do you really need to spend $160,000 plus to discover yourself? I mean, is that really the best way, the wisest use of money? I mean, even like, what does that teach our generation about the value of a dollar? I mean, if you want to discover yourself, well, why do we say in our society the narrative, that's the word I'm looking for, the narrative that, well, you should spend all this money to, go and, have Greek life and have the time of your life, and then you'll work afterwards. Like it's, kind of built up in this narrative as like, this is, the highlight of your young life, and this is the time where you'll figure it out. But plenty of people I know that graduated college, and one, it wasn't the time of their life. They were like, yeah, that was just the beginning, and that's how it should be. And two, it's, it was the time of your life, but also, if you're just figuring yourself out, people end up majoring in one thing and end up doing completely different careers. I mean, you can't predict what you're going to do, but, if you end up doing a major in English just so you get the degree and you end up working in tech, why did you go to that university for 4 years? However, we have to cut for a break, so we'll be right back. And again, this is Think Tech Hawaii, and we'll see you in a minute. Hey, Sachi, can you?
Aloha, my name is Justine Espiritu, and I co-host Hawaii Farmers Series with Matthew Johnson of Oahu Fresh. We talk about Hawaii's local farmers and their supporters. In order to have a vibrant and sustainable local food system, farmers are always the foundation, but there's so many other people involved in the community that help support those farmers. So we bring those folks onto our show every Thursday at 4 p.m. We get their backstory, their history, find out a little more about them, and we find out why they love what they do and their perspective and their advice on how we can continue to have a dynamic and vibrant and sustainable local food system. So we broadcast live every Thursday at 4 p.m. And you can also catch us on ThinkTech's YouTube channel as well as Alelo 54. So we hope you tune in and join us. Thank you.
Welcome back to Think Tech Hawaii. I'm your host, Hillary Weinberg, and I'm here with Andy MacCracken of the National Campus Leadership Council. Andy, welcome back to the show. And when we cut to a break, we were discussing the value of an education. So what is that value? What are students in our generation getting out of school? I mean, does it lead to higher rates of employment? And what's the story here?
Yeah, so we know that by far, finishing your college education, and even to some extent just starting your college education, leads to better employment outcomes later on and better lifetime earnings. Something that we actually started at NCLC this last year, we went around the country and brought together student leaders and business leaders in about 15 cities around the country to really come together and talk about this challenge on its own. So it was part of research that we were doing with the Lumina Foundation to better understand how student leaders felt about the money that we're investing in higher education, particularly federal financial aid dollars. But we knew that getting their sense of what they thought was working or not working, what they were aware of, what they felt influential about, we knew that didn't tell the full picture because we were only hearing about what is helping you get to graduation day and not necessarily what helps you succeed after graduation day. So that's why we went around and brought in employers and business leaders, workforce planners, to really have that conversation with students. And what was fascinating is it was really the first time, I think, that a lot of these employers and a lot of these students were in a room together outside of a job interview. And it was finally a moment for them to really share their experiences navigating really a common problem. They're just coming at it in different angles. Something that we learned, so in 14 out of the 15 cities, when we asked, why is there this disconnect between what colleges think they're doing well and then what employers think isn't going well? And in every single place, or in 14 out of 15 states, or 14 out of 15 cities, the first comment was, well, you know, students these days, or graduates these days, are actually really, really smart. We think they're fantastic. There's just a lack of professional skills, whether you want to call them soft skills, communications, critical thinking. It's really applying the knowledge that they've been concerned about. And so we asked the students, well, where do you actually gain those skills? And we learned a lot that it's out of the classroom, it's outside of the classroom. And that, I think, confirms a lot of what we've sort of experienced as young people in recent years, but really speaks volumes about where we need to go in higher education. And it's going to be a large gap to cover.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating problem because, and I hear a lot of it from our peers, that, you know, you apply to jobs and you go to these job interviews and like, well, what do you know how to do? And it's like, well, I had a college education. You know, like that's what I have. You know, maybe I did a few internships, but there's a couple different problems with this. One is this culture of internships, where you're expected in an entry-level position, you're expected to have 2 years experience. I don't understand, you know, where you're supposed to get this experience. If it's the entry-level positions, it require experience, so okay, maybe internships count. But the value of internships varies, because some internships are wonderful and they'll teach you tons of skills, and some they just have you doing office work or just kind of sitting and doing reading and taking notes at meetings. So, you know, and a lot of times these are unpaid. So of course, you know, there's that economic gap of people who can afford to do these unpaid internships and who can't afford to do them. But, you know, you can graduate college with several internships and still not find jobs, because then the jobs, you know, the skills they list in the job descriptions are different than what you were learning in the internship. So how do we close that gap?
I think it comes back to what's really invested into internships, and no doubt, you know, having an internship and actually, you know, being in the workplace and figuring out not just how to operate, how to communicate in a professional environment, but also how to really take what you have learned in school and apply it outside of the classroom, I think is incredibly valuable. What we learned through the research that we did, even just sort of anecdotally, a big theme that we heard was, you know, obviously students are very concerned about unpaid internships, and employers have stopped investing into internships as paid, and obviously not a lot of them are unpaid, because they're not seeing the return on their investment from those internships. And I think it speaks to exactly what you just sort of walked through, which is, you know, you're in there, it might not be the most quality experience for the student or for the employer. Now, why is that? What we heard from employers in a few cities with really tremendous co-op programs. So Georgia Tech, Drexel University, they have, among others, they have really great co-op programs that are actually built into the curriculum, where for 6 months at a time, you're actually supposed to be on the job working full-time for an employer, gaining those skills, applying what you've learned so far in school. In a lot of cases, that turns into long-term employment after graduation, or even as you're as you're sort of working through the rest of school. And the reason why employers like that and why the students like that is it's a long-term relationship. They build trust, they actually develop the skills. The employer sees the return on the dollars that they're actually investing into a person. But unfortunately, a lot of the internships that are out there are based on sort of these 10-week, 12-week, maybe 14-week cycles, where, you know, you as a student, you get to the end of that, you've just figured out where the bathroom is. You know, these are really challenging experiences, and you need to really think about how you invest in those interactions, so that on both sides you're really getting the value for what that is.
Yeah, and I think there's, you know, a lot of room for improvement in this, and, you know, and it also begs the question: is it the university's responsibility to train students for jobs? I mean, if you're looking at, you know, why universities were established in the United States originally, a lot of them were just, you know, the Socratic seminars and everything. It was to advance learning, to create an educated population. not to train you for a specific job. I mean, maybe law or, becoming a doctor or something, but, and a lot of liberal arts universities, institutions have very strong histories of this. I mean, you look at some of the, Northeastern colleges, I mean, Hampshire and Smith and some of those smaller Northeastern institutions that have, are wonderful institutions of learning. They may not prepare you for jobs, but they create people, they create citizens that are educated and well-rounded, et cetera. So is it the university's place to be teaching these job skills? I mean, what happens in our economy that it used to be that you got a job and then you were trained on the job, and it was the responsibility of the company to train you, not to expect you to show up and be the perfect employee.
I think that so Gallup recently did a poll, and they updated it recently, but the stat that we worked with, I think, was from 2014. I think the number shifted slightly, but not very much. But they found that 96% of college provosts, so the chief academic officer, the one in charge of figuring out what the academic program is going to look like, 96% of them said that their graduates are ready for the workforce, ready for success in the workforce. Unfortunately, only 11% of business leaders agreed with that, and only 14% of the general public agreed with it. So that's a huge gap. And what it really speaks to, I think, is the different definitions of what success in the workplace is going to look like. So if you speak to more of the traditional academia, I think that more of the ways of thinking, critical thinking, a lot of, if it is a liberal arts degree, there's tremendous value there. But the question is, how are you applying that knowledge? How are you applying that way of thinking into the workplace? And that's where there tends to be a little bit of a gap. Gallup also came out with last year and had just came out with their second version of this report recently, is the Gallup Purdue Index, which really looks at what are the experiences that students have that actually that prepares them for the workforce, and so that they're better engaged in the workforce, but also that they have sort of healthy and productive lives coming out of school.
That's great. So, so universities are doing some things, students are doing some things, companies are doing some things. What is the result of this? What are the employment rates, unemployment rates, and underemployment rates for people in their 20s?
So I don't have specific numbers for you, but I can point you toward some resources on our website, which is nationalcampusleaders.org. We also work with really great partners at an organization called Young Invincibles, which is a millennial research and advocacy focused organization that actually every month, every jobs report that comes out, they look at the numbers for young adults and figure out how we stack up against the general population. So pretty much every month for the last decade, young adults have had about twice the unemployment rate of the rest of the population. So that's not great. And that takes into account, obviously, like people who are in school and or otherwise not working. So that's just looking at people who are out there looking for work. We also know that among recent graduates, while employment rates are higher for that of cohort that didn't go to school, we know that there are actually a lot of students that start school and can't finish. And that's really one of the more dire financial situations to be in. The number I told you before, where about 15% of student loan borrowers default within a couple of years of starting repayment, the vast majority of those are actually for balances less than $5,000. So we're not just talking about, myself, I have $78,000 in student loans. A lot of that's from grad school. But the numbers actually show that the less you have, or in the case, the less you have, the more tricky it can be. And I think that's because a lot of people are taking on this debt. They're not finishing school. We know that there isn't a sufficient way to really credential any sort of college experience less than a full degree, whether it's if you're pursuing a bachelor's, you need to get that bachelor's. If you're trying to get an associate's, you need to get the associate's degree. And so we need to really figure out not just how we're making sure students are getting through school and completing school, but also how do we actually account for the experiences that they're gaining throughout school, so that if something does come up financially, or there's a tragedy in their personal lives that they have to drop out of school, there's something to show for it that doesn't leave them in a worse off financial situation than when they started.
That's a great idea. It's something I haven't considered before. So are universities doing anything to tackle this problem?
No. Some of them might be. I can't speak for, there are about 5,000 institutions that get Title IV, which is Title IV funding is Pell Grants and federal student loans and all of that. So there are thousands of institutions. There is an idea out there sort of circling around Washington, D.C., as well as just among a bunch of advocacy organizations that would, called income share agreements, basically where institutions would be held accountable to some extent if one of their graduates defaults on their loans or can't pay off their loans. And so it puts a little skin in the game. There are a lot of questions on how that'll actually work. But again, that would give more of an incentive. The other thing that I mentioned before, the U.S. Department of Education has their college report card system, and there is data out there on cohort default rates. So of a graduating class on a given year, how likely are they, or how frequently have those graduates defaulted on their loans? And you can track that back to individual schools. So you can actually go on and figure out what the default rate is to have graduated from American University or University of Hawaii or University of Idaho, anywhere. And I think more focus on what that actually means and getting that sort of into the hands of the students and families who are making decisions of where to go to school could go a long way. There just isn't a really big focus on that or readily accessible data until now. We just need more people to use all of that. And one last thing I will mention to speak to that issue in particular is we actually have programs out there that are available for college graduates with federal student loans to actually cap their monthly income, their monthly student loan payments at a percentage of their discretionary income, and that's a program I take advantage of. I'm actually, I mentioned I've a whole bunch of debt from my college education, as many we have 40 million borrowers out there. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't use income-based repayment programs. So what it meant for me is I use the pay-as-you-earn program, and otherwise, if I weren't using it, my payments would be month to month would be it would be close to $900 a month. I think it's about $860, I think, a month. But through pay-as-you-earn, my payments are $200 a month. So you can see that that's all the difference in the world.
That's huge
for me. So
and I want to talk more about this, but unfortunately, we have to cut to another commercial break. Yeah. Hold that thought. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm your host on Think Tech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, Think Tech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world. And we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Hi, my name is Cindy Matsuki, and I host the show High Growth with HTDC on Think Tech Hawaii. This is the show where we talk about all things tech, innovation, entrepreneurship, and manufacturing, because there's so many things going on in Hawaii and more people should know about them. So this is the program that you can come and find out about all the things happening in Hawaii. And this show also airs on Olelo 54 along with Think Tech Hawaii. And it broadcasts live every other Tuesday at 3 p.m. So don't forget, check out the show Tuesday, 3 p.m. every other week. High Growth with HTDC. Thanks.
Welcome back to Think Tech Hawaii. I'm your host, Hillary Weinberg, and I'm here with Andy MacCracken at the National Campus Leadership Council. And right before the commercial break, we were talking about student loans and the different programs out there. So you're talking about that there are programs out there that the president passed where you can have student loan repayments based on your income.
Yeah.
And are there any other programs that you know about that would be good for our listeners to hear?
So there are a variety of different income-based repayment programs. I think the biggest thing is just know that they are out there. And if you are a student loan borrower and you're concerned about your payments, you should reach out to your loan servicer and ask them about it, or reach out to us. We have a lot of great partners who are really great experts in the field, and we've had to navigate a lot of this ourselves on our own teams. So yeah, there are different income-based repayment programs. Some of them, there's the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which actually, you cap your payments based on a percentage of your discretionary income. And if you maintain those payments, if you're consistent with them, you pay each one for 10 years, and you're in a public service field. So if you're a teacher, if you're a uniformed officer or anything like that, or even working at a nonprofit, you can actually get the balance of your loans forgiven after 10 years. So that's just a thing to consider. But again, I think the idea is that there are a lot of different programs out there, but you have to figure out which is right for you. The most important step is to know that there are options for you.
That's wonderful. And unfortunately, we're running a little short on time, and there's so much more I still want to talk about. But to wrap up an earlier point that you were making about student loans and students not finishing school and then being saddled with this debt, one thing that I found among my peers is a lot of people tried to transfer schools because it was a better financial decision, whether schools offered them a scholarship or transfer back to a state school, or transfer from a community college to a private institution, which is often recommended as a great way if you are tight on funds. However, colleges make this very difficult, and they make a lot of money off making people repeat credits. Do you have any thoughts or information about this?
I have a lot of thoughts. I don't have a lot of information. There is, unfortunately, it is very difficult to transfer credits. And even, I love AU to death. I love American, our alma mater. But I was in conversations. I was student government president there about 6 years ago. And I was in conversations where we were asking, why can't more students especially over the summer, take chemistry 101 or knock off their math requirement at their local community college or a regional campus where they might be working over the summer. And this is the case for a lot of institutions. I don't want to single out AU, but that was a conversation I was in. There's just not incentive for them to do that. If they don't recognize the credits, they, like you said, they get to make money off of it. Yeah.
I wanted to take calculus at a different school because AU is not strong on math, and I did not have a very good experience with the math courses I had to take, and I had to take calculus, and I wanted to take it at a different school with a stronger program, and they wouldn't let me. And it was like all this paperwork and all this headache to take, and I wanted to go travel, and I couldn't because I had a double major, and but why can't I travel and get credits from something else? And I think also schools, after a certain point, really discourage students from switching majors. They don't make majors, make a lot of credits count across majors. And I found that a lot of people that didn't graduate in 4 years were those who either switched majors or who tried to transfer schools. And, I think this puts even greater burden. I mean, it's running an institution, an educational institution like a corporation where they're looking out for the bottom line, not for the best interest of their students. I mean, I don't know how we got into this trap. I mean, do all the buildings on AU's campus need to be refurbished and redone? I don't know. I mean, I would much rather have my professors paid instead of being adjuncts, be full professors, so I can, because a lot of students, I know I had a lot of friends who go on to graduate early, and they couldn't graduate early because, I was an environmental studies major, and environmental studies, you can only do, this capstone was in the fall, and this other class was in the spring, and so you can only take it once, and, there's all these different ways that the schools really try to keep you there for the 4 years. And not really sure what the answer is, because education's so important.
There are a lot of really smart people in the space that are navigating that question, and a lot of them make a really strong case for just sort of predicting that in the next decades to come, higher ed will be forced to dramatically change because if it's if you have MOOCs, you have edX and Coursera, a lot of these programs that are out there really giving access to the world, some of the top quality professors out there. Like, what does it mean to actually share information among institutions, enforce more collaboration, and really make sure institutions are doing what they do best and not trying to compete for each other to do things that they're not good at. So I think there will be more of a shift toward that. There's a lot of discussion around what it means to have more competency-based education. So if we can demonstrate proficiency, competence in a given skill area, why can't you just walk away with a badge or some sort of sub-degree potential or credential that would account for that and be recognizable to other institutions and employers, so you can just sort of knock that away and move forward. So there are a lot of different ideas being considered. Some institutions are considering it, just sort of piloting a lot of programs themselves. I'll be really curious, as I'm sure you will be, and a lot of folks around the country, especially in Hawaii, will be interested to see where that'll go.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, and there's so much more I still wanted to talk to you about. But hopefully we'll have you back another time to discuss these issues. So, in our last minute or two, what is the main message that you and your organization would like to send out to our listeners?
I think if you are like me and a lot of students who we work with, and you're trying to figure out really tough student finances, feel free to reach out to us, but definitely know that there are resources available to you. Your own student leaders or your student government leaders, we work with hundreds of them around the country, and we are working with them every day to figure out what the best options might be for your campuses, and figure out the best way to share information about the different options that might be there for you, as a lot of students are trying to figure out their student loans, trying to figure out all these different student fees, trying to figure out buying books. I know Kelly at University of Hawaii is trying to figure out how to make sure that required courses, I think system-wide, would actually make sure that the textbooks required for those courses are actually free. So you're not forced to pay for books that are required for your education.
Problem.
So,
and then sometimes professors would have you buy a book and they'd only use one chapter out of the book.
Right, and we could talk for days about textbooks and all of that. But again, I think there are a lot of resources out there. There are student leaders who are really at the forefront trying to find those solutions. We're trying to connect them, but we always need more help. So if there are people out there who are trying to figure this out or have interest in getting involved, I would definitely welcome that, and we want to make sure everyone's sort of off the sidelines and in the game to really find solutions to these really, really tough problems.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we hope to have you back soon. Again, my name is Hillary Weinberg, and this is The Whole Gamut on ThinkTech Hawaii. We are on Twitter at ThinkTechHI, and we hope to see you soon.